A very good morning to all of you present here. We have great pleasure in coming up with the next series of our webinar by Department of PG and Commerce, DGS Pillai Arts and Science Commerce, Arts and Science College, Nagapatnam. In fact, we have been standing alone from the other colleges for being one of the lead college in organizing webinar series in the whole region. We have great pleasure in welcoming each and every participant who has traveled down through this virtual mode to attend this program. We have participants from North India. We have few participants from Sri Lanka and also Malaysia. We welcome all of you. And a small instruction to all the participants. In case your audio is weak, you will find a reconnect button on the top. You can reconnect it. Audio and video will be connected instantly. Similarly, at the end of the program, we will be sending you a mail which will contain the feedback link through which you can generate the certificate. Please note, certificate link will be sent only for the participants who attend the program. So only for the attendees, the link will be sent to mail after 1 hour of completion of the program. May I request our principal, Dr. Natarajan of EGS Play Arts and Science to formally welcome and also introduce the guest for today's program. Dr. Natarajan, sir.
Yes, sir. Good morning to one and all. With the blessings of Almighty and our founder chairman late Chevalier G.S. Pillai, it is an immense pleasure to thank our college chairman G.S. Chodimani, Secretary Chevalier S. Parameshwaran, trust members, CEO and directors of the group of institutions for their encouragement and wonderful support to organize this webinar. I hope all are safe and healthy during the COVID-19 quarantine period and being a good citizen of our nation, go out only for the necessary needs with safety measures. Our institution, Idayatangudi GS Pillai, EGS Pillai Arts and Science College, established in the academic year 96-97 with 5 UG courses. At present, I am very much proud to say that we are stepping into the silver jubilee year. On this auspicious year, our institution explored with 15 UG courses, 9 PG courses, 8 MPhil and 3 PhD courses. In this regard, about 300 students got university ranks. Our institution is accredited by NAC with A grade and strives for autonomous status. Through this platform, I thank the vice principals, head, and all the faculties. I also express my special gratitude to Dr. N. Kaliyaperumal, vice principal and head, Department of Commerce, for organizing to this situational webinar on pivotal role of banking in India's COVID fight and enhancing our subject knowledge during this quarantine period. And also thank all the faculty members of Department of Commerce and also thank the participants in various colleges, other states and also from other countries. Reasons for chosen this topic: COVID-19 is a universal and global level problem. Due to this, the economic crisis is prevailing at a global level. So that we are organized this webinar. We are having a remarkable speaker whose specialization lies on management, banking, and finance, who is going to share about pivotal role in banking in India's COVID-19 fight. Dr. Alam K. Alamelu is working as a professor and head Department of Banking Management, Alagappa University. I welcome you, ma'am. She is,
Thank you, sir.
thank you, ma'am. She is formerly director in charge of Director of Distance Education, Alagappa University. She is having 28 years of teaching experience. She has presented many papers in both national and international conferences. So far, more than 80 research articles published in the national and international journals. She has successfully completed 2 PhD and 4 MPhil scholars With the remarkable introduction and information, I hand over the webinar session to the resource person, Dr. K. Alamelu, Professor, Department of Banking Management, Alagappa University, for delivering a lecture on pivotal role on banking in India's COVID-19 fight. Thank you for the opportunity. Once again, I welcome you all. Thank you.
Honorable members of the Board of Management of EGS Pillai Arts and Science College, Nagapattinam, respected principal of the college, head of the Department of Commerce, Dr. Kaliya Perumal, other related departments, allied participants, it gives me immense pleasure to be a part of this webinar on a theme related to our area of specialization, namely banking. For this golden opportunity, I thank Dr. Natarajan, the principal, whom I know for the past 15 years, when he visited our campus as a research scholar for the purpose of collecting data relating to his doctoral work. And the topic is pivotal role of banking in India's COVID fight. All of us are very much accustomed to the acronym COVID for the past 3 months. In fact, the phenomena started as early as November in the country of China. I am not going to talk much about the background of COVID and all the rest of it. But a cursory glance of the literature relating to COVID reveals that it can be termed as a black swan event. Out of curiosity, I browsed for what is a black swan event. So it is defined as an extreme rare event which is impossible to predict. The term was first popularized by a trader in the Wall Street of New York Stock Exchange. His name is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. His name has become popular right now. He wrote about the concept of black swan event as early as in 2001 in his book called Fooled by Randomness. Now let us raise a question. Were there any black swan events earlier? Yes, few were identified as black swan events. The World War I and II, the dot-com bubble in the United States in 2001, the subprime crisis of the USA in the year 2008, and the most important terrorist attack of 9/11 of the Twin Towers. These 4 events are termed as black swan events by the experts. Added to this black swan event is the COVID-19 now. And these black swan events are unpredictable. The consequences, the results are very severe. We cannot predict the results, and it has to be handled on a case-to-case basis, situation by situation. And we know the consequences. Lot of news item, thanks to the media, are getting the extent of damage, how the world will be. The experts have coined a word called as new normal, how the new normal will be and all. Lot of research work is going on it. So I can say that there are triple crises which have arisen out of this COVID-19. For some cogency's sake, we can put it as the health crisis, the economic crisis, as well as the social crisis. We cannot talk much about the health crisis. Following up the news, yesterday's number is around 58.42 lakhs, those who are infected. Around 3.5 death cases have been reported. India alone, it has suffered to the tune of 1.5 lakh persons in terms of infection, and around 5,000 people in terms of death. And there has been a very severe lockdown. Statistics say that out of 8 billion global population, around 3.9 billion people are under lockdown. And as a result of this, we have faced this economic crisis also. The world GDP global outlook is very pessimistic. All economies are expected to face a negative growth, according to a report issued by the IMF. And following this economic crisis is what we have, the social crisis, lot of unemployment, lot of poverty. Newspapers day by day are reporting about the plight of migrants who are moving from one state to another in India as well as in other countries. There will be some food crisis. And one of the important problems the world will face in the long run may be an ecological problem, that is increased medical wastages, which will emanate out of the treatment that has been given to the COVID patients. And a lot of human rights violations are taking place. We do have some lot of domestic violence because of this lockdown and all. And this has widened the inequalities which are already prevailing in a developing country like India. So the consequences are too many. We can talk about the consequences for hours together. But the pivotal question that is around us is, that is before us is, how we are going to manage the situation. And for this, a sector by sector analysis needs to be made. And for this particular aspect, I have taken the banking sector. But even before that, how the global economy is affected. I have few slides for it. Next. This next slide. The global economic impact of COVID-19, according to the World Bank data, the global economy may suffer a loss which will range between 5.8 trillion to 8.8 trillion US dollar. That is, it will be around 6.4% to 9.47% of global GDP. This is an estimate from the Asian Development Bank. And the WTO, the lead organization of the global trade, it says that world trade will come down by around 13.32%. And all regions will suffer double-digit decline in trade volume, and the worst affected will be North America and Asia. So North America and Asia will be the hardest hit. So life will not be full of roses for us in economic terms. That is what experts say. We will be facing severe consequence in terms of fall in the growth rate in all the economies. This is a universal phenomena. It cannot be identified with one particular country. So on account of this COVID-19, all the sectors invariably are affected, especially sectors like entertainment, food, travel, hospitality, metals. They are affected to the worst possible extent. And when we come to the Indian economy, what will be the impact of COVID-19 on Indian economy? If we just turn the pages, right? The last budget, the government of India, it has estimated the nominal GDP growth rate at around 10%. But now, what the consultancy agency and others are saying is that prediction is far from reality. That will not be true. So many factors are attributed to this because of this COVID. As we all know, there has been a heavy slowdown in demand. Production activities have come to a standstill. Crude prices internationally have come down. There has been a ban on foreign trade in almost all the countries due to this lockdown. There has been a decrease in metal prices except gold. All the other metal prices have increased. And as I was saying, the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, the biggest revenue earners for many of the countries, they have been affected, especially for India. All these factors, they have a multifarious effect on Indian GDP, and it is predicted that the country's growth rate will come down to 2.5%. Right, and even a renowned consulting agency, Goldman Sachs, it states that it will not be around 2.5, it will be just 1.6 only, unimaginable. And on account of this, the Asian Development Bank, it says that around 30 billion US dollar will be the loss for India. So, in fact, I have painted a very gloomy picture. It is not my prediction. It is a prediction of the global level agencies, including India. The consequences will be very serious. if that is the case, if you make this, if you make the contribution of different sectors towards economic development, the banking sector plays a very important role. In any country, it is pre-COVID or post-COVID, the banking sector, role of banks. Well, in any country, banks, they do play a very banking is that banks, you see, they always take up an important task in an economy. They are the financial intermediaries. They act as a bridge between the savers and investors. They play an important role in transforming liabilities into assets. So without financial intermediation, no economy can survive. So that is why economists call banks as the nerve center of an economy. So they tap the savings, channelize the funds for investment, remittance facilities, which is the backbone of foreign trade, which is the backbone of many economic activities, takes place through the bank. They are very particular in extending productive credit. Most of the sectors rely on bank credit, especially in an emerging market economy like India. And banks are society friendly also. They have a lot of society orientation. Corporate social responsibility now has been mandatory for the companies. But right from day one, the banks are always society friendly. They are lending to the most needy sectors of the economy. They discharge a lot of social obligations. They view society orientation as a brand building exercise. And banks are catalysts in the employment generation. Banking sector itself creates a lot of jobs. All of you know, each student dreams to have a banking profession, right? Given the GN size of the Indian banking sector, indirectly, banks also create a lot of jobs through the MSME sector by funding them through very many loan avenues. So it is one of the biggest employment generator. So I cannot imagine an economy without the pivotal role of banks. So without finance being the lifeblood of the business. So banks do play a very important role in economic development. But how this banks will be playing the role in the post-COVID period, that is the crux point of my discussion. With that as a backdrop, what exactly is the status of the banking sector today? We have a very giant size, robust size banking sector. Forget about the past 3 months. Indian banking sector is known for its strengths. The biggest strength of the Indian banking system is its network. We do have number of banks as well as a robust branch network. In terms of banks, I'm talking only about the commercial banks. We have specialized financial institutions like the development banks. Apart from that, we do have cooperative banks, which are instrumental in extending rural credit and all. So a strong network of banks and branches is a core strength of the Indian banking setup. So in the, I am not going to picturize the structure and all, but the structure is dominated by the public sector banks. You know, State Bank of India, the biggest bank in India, the biggest bank in the world in terms of branch network. More than 10,000 plus branches. The State Bank alone is having a unique place, the premier bank of the country, including State Bank of India. We had 20 public sector banks, but as most of us are aware, during the last 6 months, the banking sector is in the consolidation mode. So as on date, we have now, it is the PowerPoint, it is given as NOV, it is now it is 12 banks. After consolidation, the government initiated the process of merger of commercial banks in order to enjoy the economies of scale, and in order to rationalize the operations, in order to protect the interest of the depositors in few cases and all. So we have GN-sized public sector banks in which the government happened to be the major stakeholder, followed by the 20 private sector banks. It comprises of 12 old banks like the Karur Vysya Bank, the City Union Bank, and all the rest. And we have the siblings of the Indian banking sector, I can say, the new generation private sector banks, which are very aggressive, like ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, Axis Bank, Kotak Bank, and all. And the very new entrant to the system is the 11 payment banks. All of you may be knowing about the Airtel Bank, the Vodafone's M-Pesa, and all. And we have 10 small finance bank like the Equity Bank, Equitas Small Finance Bank, AU Small Finance Bank, and all the rest of it. And we have 43 regional rural banks like the Pondian Grama Bank, the Pallavan Grama Bank. Lot of turnaround stories are going on there in the case of regional rural banks. And we have a strong cooperative banks encompassing 1,542 urban cooperative banks and 94,384 rural cooperative bank. And these banks are very ably supported by a very vibrant, a very dense ATM network of around 210,263 ATMs, which acts as mini branches. So we now have a question: will ATMs substitute branches in the long run, which is still lingering around? And we have a very voluminous deposit base of around that figure is missing in the PowerPoint. It will be running into crores and crores of rupees, as said by the Reserve Bank of India. I will update the figure. And we have a PMJD deposits alone of 1.28 lakh crore, and the impressive asset size of 166 lakh crore. Credit growth is also consistent. The important strength of the Indian banking system is digital divinity. That is, most of the banking transactions are going through the digital mode. As I was saying, the deposit base of commercial banks today, the first point, there has been a gap in the PPT. It's around 77.32 trillion crore. A very mammoth size of deposits, and the asset size is 166 lakh crore, and the credit growth is around 100 lakh crore. And as far as the digital banking transactions are concerned, the data says that it is around 552.26 crore digital transactions up to in March 2020 alone. Out of this, the unified payment interface, the pet child of the NPCI, it is around 1.32 billion transactions. In terms of monetary value, it is around 31.76 billion. And there are around 925 million debit cards which are being issued by the commercial banks. And the banks are doing societal banking as a brand building exercise, which is considered to be another plus point of the Indian banking sector. Societal banking is lending to the priority sector like the agriculture, MSME sector, who are the major clients of the banking sector. We all, as academicians, we know the importance of educational loans. Many of the students, they are benefiting out of the educational loans which are granted by the public sector banks. Housing loans, right? In order to improve the standard of living of the society, most of us are relying on bank funding support for the construction of houses. So these are the important strengths of the Indian banking sector. A cushion enjoyed by the Indian banks in terms of deposits, advances, and all the rest of it. But if you turn the coin, when I was searching materials for this particular caption, many of the newspaper report, they were very pessimistic about the Indian banking sector. All is not well with the Indian banking sector, even before the occurrence of the crisis. The Reserve Bank of India was undertaking a restructuring exercise. It was just cleaning up the balance sheet of all the commercial banks, which was very frequently insisted by the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, a well-known economist, Dr. Raghuram Rajan. So the balance sheet cleaning process was undergone. The biggest headache for the bank is the so-called NPAs. What I have given it as the asset quality deterioration. We got mounting NPAs, especially you see the numbers. It was around 4.3% in March 2015. It was considered to be at a tolerable level. It went up to 9.3% in March 2019. Around the financial stability report of the RBI, which was released in the month of December 2020, it says that it will be around 9.9% in September 2020. That is even before the occurrence of the crisis and all. And in the process, the banks have a return of huge level of NPA as bad debt. There's no scope for recovery at all. These non-performing assets were sitting as a burden on the part of the bank. So these non-performing assets, for the students in the audience forum, I just want to say the amount of unrecovered advances by the banks. So one of the important assets of a bank is its loans and advances, and only out of the loans and advances a bank is generating income. And if a bank does not generate any interest income, its profitability will be affected. So a non-performing asset creates a lot of headaches for the bank. Bankers call it as a double-edged sword. It eats away the existing income. You have to create provisions and all. It is on this front, all the banks, irrespective of the sector, it may be a private sector bank or a public sector bank, they were suffering like anything. Why the situation arises? Why this change between 2015 and 2019? Why this steep rise in the level of NPAs? Bankers say that there are two important reasons.
Hello.
Their main customer, the MSME sector, they were not doing well during this past period because of the demonetization impact and the introduction of the GST. So demonetization and GST gave the twin blows to the customers of the bank who were unable to repay, and as a result, NPAs could not be contained. And as I was talking about the mergers and all, consolidation challenges are still there. Though the banks have gone in for mergers, from numbers have been trimmed to 12 from 27. The Punjab National Bank, the biggest, second largest bank, next only to State Bank of India, it has taken over two banks, Oriental Bank of Commerce and United Bank of India. The Union Bank of India, another well-performing bank, was given the responsibility to handle the affairs of Andhra Bank and Corporation Bank. Canara Bank has taken over Syndicate Bank. Indian Bank was thrust with Allahabad Bank, and Bank of Baroda, it has become a very big entity after merging Vijaya Bank and Dena Bank. But still the process is going on. All these anchor banks, that is the Punjab National Bank, Union Bank, Canara Bank, Indian Bank, as well as BOB, they are facing lot of problems on account of this merger. But the two important problem is branch rationalization. Still, the amalgamated banks exist in their own name and identity. And people rationalization also happen to be a problem because the culture, working culture, systems, procedures, and are totally different, though they come under the same banner of the public sector banks. And technology is also not integrated because different banks are using different software platforms. So this poses a lot of challenges, and above all, many of these merged entities come with a lot of bad loans. That is what I have given it as a stressed loans are too many. So for example, a bank like Indian Bank, whose balance sheet is very clean, it was given a bank, namely Allahabad Bank, which was having lot of NPAs. So now it has affected the balance sheet of Indian Bank also. So this is an important problem. So this consolidation, it has thrown open many challenges before the banks. So this is another aspect to be considered as a weak link of the Indian banking sector. And in order to clean up the balance sheet, as I was talking about Raghuram Rajan's suggestion of balance sheet cleanup, he suggested the acronym of PCA. That is prompt corrective action. Those banks which are not doing well, they should be put under the lens. So prompt corrective action has been initiated against renowned names like IDBI Bank. IDBI Bank actually was a private sector, public sector bank. It has been converted into a private sector bank, and all of us know that LIC is a major stakeholder in IDBI Bank. And the Indian Overseas Bank, a traditional bank of our region. Then UCO Bank, the Central Bank of India, Lakshmi Vilas Bank, which was doing well as an old private sector bank. All their balance sheets are also not good. They also come under RBI's prompt corrective action. Once the PCA comes into the picture, they are not given free hand to lend. The restricted lending completely monitored by the RBI. It is like surveillance by the RBI. So these banks also come under the affected category. When this is the case with the public sector banks, private sector banks are also not free from problems. Two well-known, what we were thinking as the reputed banks, they were caught in corruption controversies. One is the ICICI Bank with the former chairman, Mrs. Chanda Kochar, being trapped for corruption and bribery and creating lot of non-performing assets. And the recent Yes Bank controversy of its chairman, Mr. Rana Kapoor. It also affected the depositors, the stakeholders, and all. On account of these factors, the last point is emerging lot of importance. There has been a total loss of trust in the banking entities. One fine day during the first quarter of 2020, what the RBI did, in the first time in the Indian history, a moratorium has been declared on Yes Bank. A moratorium is nothing but freezing the operations of the bank. because of the corruption charges, accumulated NPAs, and all. Yes Bank for a very long time has been presented as a well-performing bank, a blue chip bank for the investors. It was known for its systems, a very aggressive bank and all. But the RBI had frozen its operation, and it restricted the withdrawals at 50,000 rupees. It sent panic button. It said it switched on the panic button for the depositors. Lot of panic was there. So as a result, what had happened? State Bank of India was forced to invest its funds in Yes Bank in order to protect the interest of the investors, in order to protect the interest of the depositors. So the Reserve Bank of India Act says moratorium is the last resort only for the purpose of protecting the depositors' interest. The RBI never goes for moratorium because the public money will be affected. And as we all know, teachers of management may be knowing, when I am putting a deposit in a bank, I am putting the deposit totally on the basis of the reputation and goodwill of the bank. Banking law says that a depositor is an unsecured creditor. The bank never offers any tangible security. I rely on the goodwill of the bank. So if one bank fails, moratorium in fact reflects a failure. If one bank fails, it is referred as a systematic failure. It will affect the confidence. I used to tell to my students, banking is purely a business of trust and confidence. Without confidence, you cannot mobilize deposits. When you are not mobilizing deposits, you cannot run your show. Deposits being the raw material for the business of banking. So, Yes Bank, which was having a balance sheet size of around 3 lakh crore, when it was given a moratorium, a panic button was switched on. Simultaneously, one of the well-performing cooperative bank, Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank, during last year, it also faced the same problem. It was a failure. By considering all those things, we have the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation, an offspring of the Reserve Bank of India, which raised the deposit insurance limit from rupees 1 lakh to 5 lakh per depositor per bank. This is a safety net for the depositor. That is, if a bank fails and the depositors are not able to get the funds from the bank, the Deposit Insurance Corporation will give the fund. This is available only to small depositors who are having a deposit of up to rupees 5 lakh. And in order to tackle the problem of non-performing assets, the government enacted a new enactment, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. But in the implementation of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code also, there are a lot of issues. The issues being cases are very slowly resolved and there are no buyers for the assets. So what was the expectation of the government? Once this IBC is enacted, the problem of NPA can be managed very smoothly, but this is also not the reality. So it is with all these weaknesses, the banks were functioning in the pre-COVID period. So they were not free from problems. The MSME problems had a cyclical effect which was affecting the banks. So balance sheet cleanup was a priority, and most of the banks, they were mostly transforming to the digital era. So they have to manage all the transformation challenges of building up the infrastructure for digital banking and all. And another important problem which I have not put it in the PPT is that capitalization was a problem, especially for the public sector bank. As per the present norms, a bank has to increase the capital proportionately to its advances. Capital mobilization is always a problem. So this is what I want to show as a weakness. So internationally, how COVID will be affecting the banks. So one of the international consulting agency, it has pointed out, that is the Accenture, an IT company at the global level, it has come out with a white paper. It has identified the COVID-19 impact on banks under 4 headings. The first one is credit management will be very severely affected. We know that non-performing assets is already a problem. It will be having a complex impact because there has been a complete lockdown. There are no business activities. So when people are not generating any income, the repayment capacity will be affected. So cash flow is coming down, and as a result, demand for goods and services will be coming down. There will be slow pace of repayment. And as a result of it, there will be revenue compression for the banks. Revenue for the banks is the interest income. And the interest income is bound to come down, and the fee-based income will also be coming down because as there are no activities, right? So as far as the fee-based business is concerned, only if the business survives, the banks will be able to generate a lot of fee-based income. And the customer service and advice provision will be playing a very crucial role. So banks, they have to play a catalytic role in the transformation of customers from the pre-COVID period to the post-COVID period, in terms of interest rate, in terms of product availability, in terms of training them for digital banking and all. And by combining all those things, it is the right time for the bank to come out with a viable operational model for the business, with a focus on customer centricity as well as cost cutting. Cost cutting will be playing an important role. They have to come out with niche products for customers. Innovation will be playing a crucial role, and the risk management techniques will be counting a lot. And how you are going to appraise the customers, because there are a lot of risk aversion on the part of the bankers to lend. But what is the only way out? They have to take the risk. Then only their business will expand. The economy will be getting a kickstarter. So the risk management techniques are to be fine-tuned. They have to be upgraded. So for this, they have to rely on financial technology services, right? And all over the world, even in the African countries, marketplace lending, or the so-called digital lending, is gaining popularity. The RBI calls it as peer-to-peer lending. So the peer-to-peer lending platforms are to be activated, so that will encourage some sort of for credit flow to the either to neglected sectors from the banking industry. So this is what the international perception of impact of COVID-19 on the banks. And by reading all those things, the Reserve Bank of India is very active in managing the crisis. It has come out with a lot of packages for the bank. You call it as the monetary stimulus, which has been given by the Reserve Bank of India. The first one is the NPA classification norms. It has been relaxed. And even before that, for a lay customer, what is the important step the RBI has taken is it has given a moratorium on payment of interest rate. That is, repayment holiday has been given. So I am a housing loan borrower. I have to pay my EMI by 31st March. But the March is the COVID period. Now the RBI says you can extend your repayment period. My EMI due, which is in the month of March, it need not be paid up to the next 3 months, April, May, June. So it will be falling due only on June, and till that 3 months period, it will not be classified as a non-performing asset. So earlier, an asset will be classified as a non-performing asset after the expiry of 90 days. Now that period has been extended to 180 days, and during last week, the Reserve Bank of India, it has extended the repayment holiday for another 3 months. It has been extended up to August 31st. So this is what the first measure the Reserve Bank has taken in order to help the borrowers. To whom it will be helpful? It will be most helpful to the MSME borrowers who are not at all doing any activity during this COVID period. MSMEs being the main customers of the banks. Right. So this is one important step that has been taken. But the point I want to, it is not waiver of any interest. From the borrower side, there has been a complaint that if this moratorium is declared, what banks are doing is that they are extending the repayment period, and my housing loan duration extends, and as a result, my interest obligation is also extended. As such, even the case has been filed in the Supreme Court regarding this, and the court has asked for transparency on this measure. Banks have yet to react. That is what the consequence of the measure is shaping around. And working capital support, it has been given to the stressed borrowers on easy terms. That is, their drawing power can be increased, or the margin can be reduced, or the working capital requirements can be reassessed by the banks. This is what the RBI has said. So concessional approach in the case of working capital facilities. This restructuring facility is also given to the MSME loans and all. What and all I have given in terms of working capital support, term loans and all, is equally available to micro, small and medium enterprises. And in terms of capital adequacy norm, there is a ratio called as net stable funding ratio. A relaxation is given by the Reserve Bank of India with regard to adhering to this ratio. So apart from this, the Reserve Bank has also touched the policy rates. So the RBI has tried to convey a message that banks will be adopting a borrower-friendly approach as far as managing the credit portfolio is concerned. And what is the important advantage of the borrower here is that though the interest commitment remains the same, the credit score of the borrower will not be affected. So because every loan today is granted only on the basis of the credit score given by the CIBIL, because of the relaxation in the NPA classification norm, even if I am not repaying the loan on the due date of March, April or May, my credit score will not be affected, and as a result, my further ability to borrow from the bank will not be affected. So the Reserve Bank wants to send a very optimistic signals to the borrowers and all that the banks are with them, the Reserve Bank is with them in enabling them to tide over the crisis very smoothly. And the Reserve Bank has also gone in for one of the monetary policy instrument, which is called as targeted long-term repo operations. This TLTRO, or the targeted long-term repo operation, is a monetary policy tool, and it was first introduced in Europe. They call it as targeted long-term refinance operations, but in India it is called as targeted long-term repo operations. So by using TLTRO, a bank can borrow from the Reserve Bank of India. They can increase the liquidity, and for borrowing that, they can give the Government of India securities as a collateral. So the TLTRO provides cheap funds to the bank. So when a bank is borrowing from the depositor, say at 7% rate of interest for recycling of funds, here the bank can borrow the money from the Reserve Bank at 4% rate of interest. So it gives access to cheaper capital from the RBI. So this in turn encourages them to lend further. They can give a fillip to the economic activity. They can invest these long-term funds in assets which will be earning better results for them. And this will be giving a lot of impetus to bank to invest in the government securities market as well as in the corporate securities market. This is called as a targeted long-term rating, because now the banks are asked to target to invest in the securities of the high-rated corporates. So there will be a boost in the commercial paper market. This in turn will supply funds to the companies to manage the working capital very smoothly. It will strengthen the corporate bond market. And the demand for government securities will also increase. Stability in government prices security can also be ensured on account of all those things. So this is considered to be a very crucial measure. The TLTRO has been done in 2 stages. In the month of March, the Reserve Bank of India announced TLTRO to the tune of 1 lakh crore. And again in the subsequent month, it announced a TLTRO of 50,000 crores exclusively to be invested in non-banking finance companies, which are also in a crisis. These non-banking finance companies are the major lenders to the MSME sectors. For the NBFCs, what is the point here is that those who are not having access to bank credit, they can borrow from the non-banking finance companies. Companies like Sundaram Finance, Muthoot Finance and all, which are lending very, very heavily in terms of jewelry loan. So this TLTRO is considered to be a very good exercise in order to inject further liquidity into the system. So the TLTRO worth 50,000 crore was announced by the Reserve Bank of India on April 17. So this is the basic information about the TLTRO. The policy rates, which will be sending signals about the rate of interest of the Reserve Bank of India, it has been changed significantly during the crisis period. You see the table. During the pre-COVID period, the repo rate was standing at the title has been changed. I'm sorry for it. During the post-COVID period, the repo rate is 4%, whereas pre-COVID period, it is 5.15%. So from 5.15%, it has been brought down to 4%. The reverse repo rate, which was 4.9% in the pre-COVID period, it has been dropped to 3.35%. The cash reserve ratio, which was around 4%, it has been reduced to 3%. So these 3 measures. So I just want to give the primer of repo rate. Repo rate is the lending rate of the RBI to the commercial bank. The reverse repo rate is the rate at which the commercial banks can park their funds with the Reserve Bank of India. I cannot call it as a borrowing rate of the RBI. The cash reserve ratio is that part of the deposits which are to be deposited with the RBI in the form of cash by the commercial bank. So now the banks can borrow from the RBI at a cheaper rate. And when they are parking the funds with the Reserve Bank of India, they will be getting only very low rate of interest at a 3.35%. and the amount they have to deposit with the RBI in terms of CRR also comes down. So these measures increases the money available for lending in the hands of the commercial banks. Now the banks can have more lendable resources, which is the base for creating more amount of loans and advances. So that also need to be taken care of. Now, the government of India, it has given lot of stimulus package to the RBI. The government of India has given lot of stimulus package to the ailing sectors. When the Prime Minister was on the media for announcing this package, he was making a very mammoth announcement of around 20 lakh crore. Which will be injected into the economy. This 20 lakh crore includes the 11 lakh crore which is already injected into the economy by the Reserve Bank of India. So the remaining thing, all the packages are to be routed only through the commercial banks. So the commercial banks will be playing an anchor role here. So the government has announced security-free MSME loans of around 3 lakh rupees, which banks are expected to lend. And the subordinated debt to be given to the promoters of small scale industries, around 20,000 crore, banks will be playing a crucial role. And for non-banking finance companies, an allocation of around 30,000 crore has been made by the government. It will also be routed through the banks. And for the power companies, around 90,000 crore has been given. It will be lent through the banks, and NABARD will be taking up the responsibility of providing 30,000 crores of rupees through the commercial bank. Prime Minister's Kisan credit card to the tune of 2 lakh crore, in which banks will be instrumental in lending, and loans for street vendors around 5,000 crores will also be going through the banks. So both in the physical stimulus of the government as well as in the monetary stimulus of the Reserve Bank, the banks are the conduits of credit. It was routed only through the banks. So they have to take up the responsibility of managing all such loans and advances without affecting the profitability of the banks, at the same time without affecting the liquidity of the customers also. This is what I have given it as a pivotal role of banks in the post-COVID period, that is in its fight against corona and all. Next one. So if this is the case, if so much funds are flushed into the system, how banks will be, what will be the challenges the banks will be facing through? What experts predict, NPA will further surge into, and the NIM, expanded as the net interest margin, will be very low. Once again, as I have already pointed out, the financial stability report of the RBI as early as in December 2020, it has pointed out that the NPA of the banks will be around 9.9% by September, which will be the highest among the emerging market economies. China's NPA is as low as 1.8%. We don't know the impact of COVID on the NPA levels of Chinese banks. So COVID, it has very badly affected our fragile economy, which is very sensitive to changes. There has been a complete drop in production and sale. Unemployment rate is increasing like anything, and bank assets are expected to erode very fast. And even critics of the moratorium say that this EMI deferment of 3 months, it will very badly affect the repayment culture of the borrower. For example, my bank, Axis Bank, it has sent a message that you need not pay money for the next 3 months. So this creates a disincentive for me to repay. So this will affect the repayment culture of the borrowers who are able to pay in the long run. So there will be further default. And the MSME loans, the banks were following very stringent norms till March 2020 as they were in the balance sheet cleaning exercise. But now what the RBI says, you have to adopt a very lenient approach. So this will affect the balance sheet of the banks further as such. And coming to the cost of the deposits, coming to the net interest margin. Net interest margin is nothing but the difference between the interest earned by a bank through its loans and advances and other income, as well as the interest expended by the banks. Now what is happening? Banks are flush with the funds. So, but they don't have any lending avenues at all. Demand for credit is very low. That is number one. Another one is bank themselves are reluctant to lend. So successful lending, successful injection of credit depends upon two vital factors. One is bank should be able to lend, and there should be some takers for loans. Here, both the concepts are absent. So, borrowers are not at all in a position to take loans. I'm getting money for a productive activity, but I don't know what will be the fate of my production because the crisis is too much and all. So, this cost will be affected. How a bank will be able to service its depositors is a very big question mark. So, net interest margin depends upon a combination of internal and external factors, as it has been given: the capital adequacy ratio, current and savings bank account ratio, size of the loan assets, the operating cost of the bank, as well as the repo rate and GDP. All those things are declining except the repo rate, which is also in the declining trend. So growing NPA and shrinking CASA deposits, shrinking costs will be the important issues to be addressed by the bank in the long run. So this aspect, a banking student or researchers, they have to take care of. And another one is this moratorium, as I was pointing out, it will be very badly affected. It will be very badly affecting the repayment culture of the bank. And but as I was putting, the credit score may not be affected at all. So this alone is considered to be a positive signal of the so-called moratorium. And as far as the other incomes are concerned, the operating profits are dwindling, right? But the fee-based income is also not increasing proportionately because of shrinkage of operations on very many fronts as such. So these banks, they have to consider the ways and means of increasing the fee-based income. So that has to be considered into. Next slide, please. Next. The rise in service charges, whether it is possible, that has to be considered. The digital transaction charges, whether it can be rationalized. Many of the customers are not happy with the penal charges. So from all the sides, banks are being attacked. So they have to strike a very clear balance between the liquidity and the profitability. So we used to tell in the classroom that service charges are the survival charges for the banks. Many of the banks, especially the new generation private sector banks, are earning heavily in terms of service charges. But in this particular point of time, increasing the service charges or even rationalization of service charges seem to be impossible, as banks are instructed to have a very empathetic view of the customer's standpoint also. So this aspect need to be considered into. Next one, the EMI moratorium I have already declared. And we have the very young entrants into the banking system who are called as the differentiated banks. The differentiated banks are the payment banks and the small finance banks. And the payment banks and the small finance banks, so far, they are not having a good time. Their journey is very rough in the Indian financial sector. Most of the banks are yet to break even. They are still in the transition stage. And because the scope is very narrow. For example, a payment bank can undertake only remittance facilities. A payment bank like Airtel Payment Bank or Vodafone M-Pesa, they are not permitted to lend. And the small finance banks, they can go only for small ticket loans. They cannot go for giant-sized corporate lending at all. So when the scope of operations is very limited, the profitability is very much constrained. In the wake of COVID-19, the lockdown's effect is very severely felt by them, especially for the small finance banks, for whom the target segment is the informal sector like the vegetable vendors, carpenters, goldsmiths, construction workers, and all. Their asset quality will be a very big question mark in the long run. Whether these differentiated banks will survive, what will be the strategies they will be adopting in the long run in order to manage the crisis. So if that is the case, what suggestions we can give for the successful running of a bank of 2021, if we're assuming that everything will be good in the year 2021? You see, it is very important for the bank to go in for giving lot of customer centricity. So this COVID-19 framework has three pillars. One is serving the customers, another one is helping the society, another one is responding to financial difficulties. So customer centricity in a service industry like banking cannot be overemphasized, right? So every bank, in some countries, they have already started the process. They are expected to set up COVID response centers And a segment by segment analysis has to be made. What will be the impact of this crisis on the different segments of the customer? Segmentation is a strategy to be adopted by a successful marketer, so that has to be taken care of by the customers also. And as we know, a lot of rumors are going on in very many fronts that usage of cash, they also create lot of infection, so that there should be some incentives for reducing cash usage. Some of the banks, they have even tried with changing the fee or incentive structure for digital banking. So digital banking needs to be more cheaper. When the Reserve Bank of India introduced digital banking, the prime reason the RBI quoted was that it will be bringing down the cost of transactions for the customers also. It is not only for the banks. The efficiency front the RBI did, it will be very cheap for the customers to transact. But that's not the reality. We have not felt the impact of cost cutting today, because that being the initial period, that will take some time to percolate into, though in terms of IMPS, the RTGS, NEFT and all, digital banking transactions are very cheaper. So some of the banks in the Western world, they are trying out with the incentive for using digital banking transactions. And it is the responsibility of the bank to facilitate smooth channel migration for the customers. And there should be reduced branch visit, that is to be insisted upon. And the branch timings are being reduced. How the banks are managing, that needs to be addressed. The second one is be very society friendly. Society friendliness, more empathy to the society is all the more important. Banks have to exhibit that they care more for the society in a crisis situation like this pandemic. For this, they have to actively encourage and empower the employees to be more customer friendly. That is, they have to inculcate a culture of even helping non-customers. For example, one of the European bank, it is organizing digital online courses for the children of the customers, free courses. So such type of initiative has to be taken. It has to be ensured that all the banks have become a purpose-led bank. And the ultimate point in mind is that this is not your CSR obligation. This is a brand building exercise. So a bank is a part of the society. It cannot live in isolation for this case. Without the society, it cannot think it's survival and all. And how the bank is going to respond to the financial difficulties, how it is going to strengthen its balance sheet is a very big question mark. So there is more demand for liquidity. The credit outlook is worsening. Government support programs, as I was saying, is to be injected only through the bank. New accounting rules may be formulated. So this in turn calls for a very high level of advanced scenario planning. In fact, all banks may separately chalk out a COVID-19 credit policy. Credit risk analysis collection calls for new capabilities. It throws open wider career prospects for digital friendly professionals and simplified processes, because as we are very much interested in minimizing the branch visit, the digital processes need to be more user friendly. And it is very important for the banks to build smart lending capabilities. Lending capabilities are to be built up by the banks. So it is just a question of smart banking, which will be helping the customers in the long run. So very many research papers have come out as a result of this COVID-19, especially its impact on the banking sector. And one of the research paper, it has suggested these strategies. A COVID sensitive bank, it has created a new experience for the customers through digital banking. All the digital channels should be open on all the times. All the channels, and omni-channel presence is all the more important, but safety first should be the mantra. And immediately digital activity is introduced. Customer surveys are to be conducted for immediate feedback. And the customer journeys ought to be very relevant and smooth, and the vulnerable sections of the society ought to be identified. For example, an old man is compelled to visit the bank branches for the purpose of pension related inquiries. Some tailored advice ought to be given to him for managing such visit, or how to minimize a visit, how he can be in the home and safely transact the business. That is what a subsequent point says. This incentivize branch visits, deliver digital banking education education, which is the need of the hour. So this is the awareness level of digital banking is comparatively limited, especially in a country like India, which is dominated by rural centers. COVID sensitive products and services are to be introduced. So some of the banks, the government of India compels the banks to go for COVID loans, COVID line of credit and all. And the storytelling is a concept which will be highlighting the digital products introduced by the bank, perhaps flashed on the website of the bank. You identify the need. This is the old mantra of marketing. You adopt the strategy of niche marketing. Bring back customers with tailored product recommendations. You can be more community friendly, and always keep your employees safe and informed. So if all these activities are taking place, I hope banks can turn the threat into an opportunity. So this pandemic has brought both opportunities as well as challenges, especially in the short term and medium term. What will be the long term impact? We don't know how long the crisis will be lasting. That is a question. So two very clear implications are emerging for the banking sector. We are going to have a financial system which is flush with liquidity. Interest rates are going to be very low, and the government will be a key player. The government will be a borrower, because the government need a lot of money for financing its fiscal activities. So the government borrowing will increase, and it will also be acting as a shock absorber. Especially it will be giving this type of guarantee support and all for banks in order to smoothen their transactions. So how the banks book loan book will be looking like, there will be an increase in risk perception, and banks will be more quality conscious. So this is where striking a balance become a problem. Banks are very much risk averse. Even before COVID, banks are very much reluctant to lend, because when this TLTRO measures have been introduced, I was pointing out, the RBI is ready to inject around 1.5 lakh crore, but the banks are very much reluctant to invest in the securities. They are very choosy. They are preferring to lend to borrowers with visible and strong cash flows. Banks may be now preferring to lend to the pharma and healthcare sector, given the vaccines, drugs and all we are in need of treating the patients of COVID. And the size matters for the bank. Big corporates will be preferred, because the default rate bank's perception is that it will be less in the case of big corporates. And yesterday's report from one of the credit rating agencies, Moody's, it pointed out that there is a rising need for capital for the banks, because the credit quality of borrowers may weaken in the long run. As a result, the credit cost will go up. So now the situation is very, very fragile for the bank. What I am saying is that they have money to lend, but they cannot lend, because they are not in a position to identify the creditworthy borrowers in order to ensure the so-called safety of funds, in order to bring down the level of non-performing assets and all. So liquidity is there, but profitable lending avenue is a question mark. They have to make a balance before it. So especially in the case of retail segment, you see, retail depositors, now they feel that it is very safe to deposit in a bank. It is very safe to deposit in a bank. So banks will be flushed with deposits. But propensity to borrow for spending will decline. Nobody is ready to borrow from the bank. And banks are having a lot of deposits. So this is going to be the situation for the bank as far as the future of banking is concerned. So this particular cautious approach of the bank may lead to a fall in the volume of unsecured credit, especially as far as the retail deposits are concerned. One of the important retail product offered by the bank is through the credit cards, as well as personal loans, which are always granted as clean loans. But because of this cautious approach, this retail loan segment is going to be affected. So the fundamental drivers of banking activity in India, experts predict that it will remain intact, because a lot of untapped credit potentials are still there. Statistics say that India's credit penetration of 70% of GDP, next slide, Jayasri, is much below most of the emerging market economies. And most of the borrowers in the informal sector, they don't have access to bank finance. It is this gap the bank is going to fill up in the post-COVID India. So it is there where banks will be acting as real conduits of growth. So it is suggested that banks should not be guided by the twin mantra of preferred and avoidable if they want to be more profitable, because no fund should be kept idle by the bank. So they have to deploy it, they have to recycling it. So we used to say that banking is just the business of recycling. For this, they have to refine the risk management strategies. So they can seek professional expertise, they can rely on technology. Risk management techniques are to be more fine-tuned and all. And a research paper points out that the pace of digitalization, though it is very high, may come down in the long run with cash shrinking down in the economy. All those challenges are to be addressed too. So the risk aversion of the bank, as in one of the earlier presentation, I was saying when I was making a reference about the non-banking finance companies, the Reserve Bank has given its stimulus. The government has also given its stimulus. It is the time for the banks to react. The ball is in the bank's court, and everything depends upon how the banks are managing the situation in terms of its efficient risk management by exhibiting its society friendliness, at the same time not compromising on the safety of the deposits. The safety first should be the mantra for the bank, because a depositor always relies on the safety of the deposits. I should be able to get back my money deposited in the bank whenever I need it. So safety and liquidity are the twin expectations of the depositors. No one is expected to compromise on it. At the same time, being financial intermediaries, what and all are the agenda of the government in terms of monetary flow? What and all are the agenda of the RBI in terms of credit flow? That has to be translated into reality only by the commercial banks. So when they are so much risk averse, it is not good for them. So it is a right time for them to strike a balance between the liquidity and the profitability, strike a balance between safety and the society orientation and consciousness. So with this, I have concluded my presentation with the last slide, which is a statement by the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. It is missing. The governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Shaktikanta Das, he has said that although social distancing separates us, we stand united and resolute. Eventually, we shall cure and we shall endure. So this is what he has noted on a very optimistic tone. Let us pray for the best. Let us pray that the country come out of its crisis. Let the globe be a very good place to live in terms of economic growth and development. There should not be further casualties. There should not be further consequences. We can expect a very soon cure from the world of medicine regarding this pandemic. That is our prayer. I hope the students and the researchers, they can get a lot of research clues out of the status of the Indian banking sector. With this, I thank the organizers for having given me the opportunity, and I am happy to hear the feedback from the respondents, if any, from the audience, if any. Thank you, sir.
Ma'am, thank you very much, ma'am. You can see the chats are saying that lots of informative information, excellent presentation, very informative, and many more things to congrats. Thank you very much for your thing, ma'am.
Thank you,
I
sir.
will request our principal, sir, if there are a couple of questions which has come up. If there are any questions, the principal can raise up on behalf of the participants.
Okay, thank you, sir. Madam, thank you for your valuable and nice presentation in a simple manner, man. With
Thank you, sir.
highly contented information, madam. The information is highly contented. Madam, only I'm asking a very one or two questions on behalf of the participants.
Okay, sir.
Madam, you are already put it in your slide. CRR, credit reserve ratio, repo rate is decreased by the RBI.
Yes, sir.
It will the newspaper. It will reflect in the loan interest on loan maybe decrease the chance for decreasing the loan rate.
Yes, sir. The purpose is that rate cuts are to be transmitted to the borrowers. Any policy rate cut, the RBI says, it should be transmitted to the borrowers. So the many of the banks you might have experienced, they have reduced their interest rates, sir.
But there is no announcement from the commercial banks, I think so.
Sir, a few banks they have come out. Even State Bank of India, it has made a change. Leading banks like Axis, HDFC Bank. So this interest rates, as far as interest rates is concerned, sir, this policy rate is only an indication, and all the banks are expected to follow suit. This is not mandated by the RBI. RBI never compels a bank, because it is a free market economy. So the RBI just gives the clues. If the repo rate is cut, bank interest rates are expected to come down, deposit rate will also come down, and it will be translated in the long run, sir. Any rate cut is to be transmitted. The transmission is expected to take place.
It's done only with the option of the commercial banks.
Yes, that is purely discretionary on the part of the bank. But sir, that will be automatic. For example, I want to borrow a loan. What I will do, I will borrow only from a bank which is given me the lower rate of interest. Right? So if one bank is reducing and another bank is not reducing, they will be losing the market share.
Oh, okay.
That will be automatic, but it will take some time.
Okay. Now, one more question, ma'am.
Yes.
One more question, ma'am.
Welcome, sir.
Moratorium. You know, already pointed out in the moratorium. But with the moratorium, the time duration only extended, or the repayment of loan or the repayment of interest is also extended. I need a clear-cut answer. In moratorium period, the time duration only extended, or the repayment as well as interest. That means the interest not calculating on the moratorium period.
Sir, only time duration is extended.
Oh. Okay.
Interest and all is, you can postpone your repayment.
Madam, because of the CIBIL score,
yes,
NPA of all the banks, after introducing CIBIL score, NPA is reduced or not? It's a practical question I'm asking.
Sir, CIBIL score has nothing to do with the NPA, sir. Sir, if you are going to borrow a loan from a bank, whether you are a good borrower or not, the bank want to know. For that, it will be looking for the CIBIL score.
Okay.
What is your score? For example, out of 900, if you are very prompt, you might have scored 850, even 900. That is possible.
Okay.
Your repayment history will be recorded in the CIBIL.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Another question, ma'am. There are a couple of questions coming out from the chat. I'm not picking up everything. I'm just picking up only two, ma'am. One question is asked by Ms. Abhinaya.
Yes.
What is the specific reason why gold price is not coming down in spite of COVID, whereas the metal price is keeping on going down?
Yes. Though it is not very directly related to it. As I was saying, the entire metal market is in the doldrums now, except gold. Because gold is one avenue which for which we have some emotional attachment, and people always have a panic that if the same trend continues and all, there will be much demand for gold, and as a result, price will further push up. And another thing, the international market, there is an inverse relationship between always. There is always an inverse relationship between gold prices and the price of other assets. Especially you take up crude, because gold is considered to be an international medium of exchange. It is considered to be a very safe bet. So all the funds will be diverted to gold. As a result, what will happen if demand increases, prices will also be increasing. That is the reason. It is considered to be the primary asset.
Okay. There's another question raised by Dr. Sharada.
Yes.
She asked, like, the banks are going to have lots of challenge in liquidity and profitability balance.
Yes.
So what are the strategies? Like, how will the bank be able to manage it, or still the bank has to always depend on the market or on the government, RBI especially, to go on it? How are the liquidity and what strategies will they be applying with regard to liquidity profitability balance?
So the liquidity profitability tangle is an important challenge faced by every finance manager. For banks, it is very crucial. Now, liquidity is not a problem for the bank. The RBI is ready to lend. Depositors are ready to park the funds. But what is the problem? Deploying the funds is a problem. The right avenue is to be tapped by the banks. As I was saying, proper risk management is to be done by the banker. They have to think in terms of cost cutting. Innovative products are to be done. But all those things can be very easily said pedagogically. Banks will be facing a lot of difficulties. and they have to fine tune their systems and procedures. So it is actually the question of survival of the fittest. If you are efficient in managing it, because banks, Indian banks, they have come across so many crises, they have managed so many phenomena very successfully. So just like that, it will also be done by the bank. It will be a challenge managing profitability, identifying the right borrower, lending, because what is the problem? Banks are not ready to lend to the borrower. Even for jewel loans now, they are very much reluctant, which is considered to be the profitable avenue for the bank, because nobody knows how the times will be. That is the thing that is to be done very cautiously.
And the many questions we'll just try to with the last question of this.
Yes.
Your presentation has given lots of ideas. Like the bankers are not going to be bankers now. They have to do multiple activities, and I
Sure,
think they
sure.
have to work on the artificial intelligence of automation also. But when this
Very
is
well.
going to happen, there's a lot of questions coming in. But one question which I found was interesting. As a commerce guy, like from which has been asked by Najita. Najita, just if I'm wrong, sorry if I wrongly said your name. Najita has asked a wonderful question. Now, share banking is going to be more liquid. It's going to have more dynamic. Is it right for us to invest in shares of banks?
For the past 2 months and all, even after the pandemic, banking stocks are doing well. I can say these banks, we have banks which are fundamentally strong as such. As the number has been reduced and all, especially the private sector banks, stocks are doing well. So, the stock market behavior is expected to be based on the fundamentals. But the way in which the market is behaving for the past 2 months does not reflect it as such. Indian stock market is doing well in terms of the crisis faced, even though we have an economic crisis and all. So, my advice is simple. Even before investing in the stock of a bank or any company, you please do the homework. What is the long run track record of the bank? So if you are investing in a fundamentally strong bank, and if you are holding your investment for a long period, it will be a very safe and profitable bet for the bank.
So
So
let
it's
the
not a
buy
question
and
of
let the options be taken by the individual investor based on the performance of the bank. Okay,
yes,
ma'am.
it depends upon the performance. You also take into consideration the market sentiment. Let us hope that it is only a very temporary phenomena, sir, and it will be easily overcome the bank. So we let us all be positive. That is what.
Okay.
That is why I have given a very positive topic. Though the literature says that banks are facing very tough times, I have given it as a pivotal role of banking,
Okay, great.
which cannot be written off in any country.
Okay, ma'am, the participants are asking for your presentation. Can we share them, ma'am?
Sir, this presentation, sir, by mistake I have shown an unrefined presentation. I will mail it, sir, to Natarajan, sir.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much for the great help and the timing. I will request.
Thank you, sir. It was a good opportunity for me. Okay, sir. Thank you so much. It was a good learning opportunity. I refreshed myself, sir. Thank a lot, and thank you, participants.
Once again,
Stay on the line.
Okay.
I have with us Dr. Kaliyat Perumal, who is the head of PG and Research, Department of Commerce, PG Pillai Arts and Science College. I will request him to formally propose the vote of thanks for all the people who have been with us, post which we will give the link for the feedback.
Okay, sir. Good afternoon to one and all. It is a great honor and privilege for me to propose vote of thanks on this remarkable occasion. With the blessing of Almighty and our founder chairman, Chevalier Dr. G.S. Pillai, I would like to propose my sincere gratitude to the chairman, Mrs. Jyoti Ammal, and the secretary, Chevalier S. Parameswaran sir, and the trust members, CEO Dr. Chandrasekharan sir, academic and administration directors of EGS Pillai Group of Institution, for their constant encouragement and support for the occasion. I express my sincere heartfelt gratitude to the chief guest, Dr. K. Alamelu Madam, Professor in Banking Management, Alagappa University, Karaikudi, who despite in this difficult situation, she found time to grace this occasion by her excellent presentation on bilateral role of banking in India in 1905. It had convey what we think and address this situation in a positive mode. Next, I extend my hearty thanks to Principal Dr. Narajan, Additional Principal Dr. A. Muhammad Ismail, Vice Principal Dr. V. S. Raja, and Dr. S. Karpakam for their cheerful encouragement. I am very much grateful to the faculty members of my department for their efforts to make this webinar success. Last but not least, I would like to thank each and every participant in the webinar during their content period for rendering their informative webinar. Once again, I thank each and everyone presented here to make the webinar a grand success. Thank you. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Madam, very thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir. I have to thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Natarajan, sir. Thank you, the management
you.
team of the college. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Madam, thank you, madam. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. See you, sir. See you, sir.